While some transitions from 2D to 3D have been universally beloved, Sonic's wasn't the prettiest. Especially for the year 1998, I do love how ambitious Sonic Adventure was. Running around Station Square is a blast, I enjoyed many of the levels, and I enjoyed nearly every single track on the OST. But not every idea was executed perfectly, and some parts have aged horribly, and the GameCube port doesn't exactly fix things. In fact, it introduces some new problems all on its own. But ultimately, Sonic Adventure is a beautiful buggy mess that has more to it that I do like than I don't. So while I've beaten all the main stories before, I've never beaten it 100%, and it was a much more casual one and done for me. But at the end of 2025, YouTuber for Emblem started what's going to be an annual tradition among us, rounding up a bunch of RetroAchievements YouTubers and doing a Secret Santa event, where we gift a game and set that we've mastered to someone else. Within reason, of course, we're obviously not gifting Animal Crossing Billionaire or Super Mario 64 bonus subset. It's meant to be a fun event. It's Secret Santa, not Secret Satan. Though that'd be a cool idea for an event too, let's be real here. For December 2025, I gifted The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time to Jonathan Wink Gaming, since he had mentioned several months prior that he had played the game before but never actually beaten it. And inversely, I ended up receiving Sonic Adventure DX from SockOwner, based on previous conversations we'd had about Sonic Adventure 2, which I actually played before 1 as a kid. But while the Dreamcast version has a relatively straightforward retro achievement set, and is mostly just in-game 100% plus a few extras, the Sonic Adventure DX set on GameCube has a lot of unique challenges, most of which was completely beyond my skill level or even comprehension of the game at the time. And once SockOwner realized just how little I knew or remembered about Sonic Adventure 1 as opposed to 2, he gave me the mercy offer to try the Dreamcast set instead. But me going out of my way to play the easier version of a game, solely for the purpose of making it easier to make a video on, would be a total bitch move. A big part of this event is getting people to step out of their comfort zone a bit to enjoy things that they otherwise might not. However, if this video does do extremely well, I don't mind going back one day to tackle the Dreamcast version because of some exclusive differences, such as the exclusive Dreamcast DLC that's been preserved. But moving on for now, looking at the DX set, there are thankfully only 2 missable achievements out of 142. Unlocking Big Story early by talking to him on the overworld at one of several points, and encountering a specific message on the terminal when you first get to the egg carrier. Naturally, we begin our journey with Sonic's story, which introduces us to Chaos and our first boss battle. Since this is Retro Achievements, you're probably expecting a damageless boss battle achievement right about now, since it's enough of a staple in the community to even be joked about on my YouTube channel banner, just above that subscribe button. However, there are no damageless challenges in this entire set, largely because these bosses are all so easy that it's not a challenge to do damageless in the first place. Most of these bosses are defeated by just running around in circles until they stop moving and then attacking. So after the easy victory, we start off right by the entrance to Emerald Coast in search of Tails. This level was mind-blowingly amazing as a kid, and even today it's still one of my all-time favorite opening levels in a video game. Beautiful visuals, fast-paced action, and enough individual elements to leave you excited to clear the current section in anticipation of what's going to come next, teaching you the ropes quite nicely along the way. But of course, one thing that Sonic Adventure is known for is the jank. And since I'm far from a pro and pretty out of my element here, having not played the game in several decades, I fell victim to the jank even in the opening level. But I still had a blast. Then each level is going to have a C, B, and A mission tied to it. You only need to clear it once to advance the story, but as far as completionist coverage goes, it makes more sense to go level by level here. All of Sonic's levels will play out exactly the same. C is a standard clear, B is a clear with 50 or more rings in hand, and A is a speedrun of the level. Unfortunately, you can't combine these into a single run, but most of these stages aren't too long anyways. Also, chaining your spin dashes by mashing B will help you breeze through most of these speedruns. But then we have the Retro Achievements challenge, and I had to save this one for much later because I just didn't have the game knowledge or spin dash mastery needed for this right away. Completing Emerald Coast without using more than 3 springs, speed pads, or spring pads. At least you can use jump pads and checkpoints though. We start by charging a spin dash jump at the opening slope to skip the springs, and then another one to skip the loop. We have to take this ramp here, and then we dodge the pad and spin dash up the ramp. After our free acupuncture session, the second loop skip gets a bit tricky, because the game really does not like it when you slow down here. After enough attempts though, we reach the next ramp without touching the speed pads. And thankfully this next section with the killer whale is a freebie, and it won't increase your counter. Then in the next section, after several attempts, we defy gravity to spin dash chain our way up this slope. In the next area, we take the lower path for the first time ever to avoid a speed pad and then just walk around the next loop. But then we have an invisible wall here, which makes it look like you'd need to take this next ramp. But the height on this invisible wall is surprisingly low, so you can just barely clear it, and then jump again to reach the next island before spin dashing up this ramp. We can spin jump to this area, or jump off the railing if needed, and then use the jump pads without any penalty. And then we just have one final spin jump to skip the loop and cross the ramp to victory. Seeing this challenge at the very beginning was definitely a bit daunting, but again, I saved it for much later, and it actually ended up being my single favorite achievement in the entire set. Something about turning the entire level into a puzzle platformer that forever improved my ability to detect and improvise skips as I played the game was actually a complete blast to overcome. After rescuing Tails, we're supposed to make our way to his workshop, which also introduces a huge part of the game, the Adventure Field hub areas. There are hidden items and upgrades scattered throughout, and a lot of that will be covered in separate sections. You may get a bit lost in some areas at first, and you'll remain lost in a few by the end, but Station Square at least can be divided up into 3 main areas: the hotel entrance area, the town hall area, and the train station/casino area. You'll have a few sub areas as well, but once you comprehend the main 3, you'll be able to get to where you need to with ease. And right after I take the time to explain all that, we're immediately going to a different hub area, the Mystic Ruins. And this one's a bit more complex, but for now at least we're not going far. Tails' workshop is right here in the train station area, where we have another easy boss battle, this time with the Egg Hornet, and you can even hit it multiple times per phase. Then after that, we make our way to Windy Valley, and this is one of many levels where if you really know what you're doing, you can pretty much skip all of it. But I'm not an expert or a speedrunner. I'm sure that every single strategy that I end up incorporating, someone is going to immediately be thinking, oh, you can just do this instead. And by all means, feel free to share them. It's good for the algorithm after all. But with the exception of a few levels, for the most part I really did try to minimize looking up tricks and glitches. There was a lot of fun in streaming this live on Twitch and being surrounded by people who knew way more about the game than me, watching me try to craft some semblance of a strategy. And even without the giant skip, the C, B, and A missions were all pretty easy, and as a result, I knew that this level's retro achievement would be pretty simple too, finishing the level with a magnetic shield and never going above 35 rings. I deliberately take a hit after this checkpoint, and then grab the magnetic shield here, going slow and steady in order to pause and then spin jump past the patches of rings. Just take your time, and you'll unlock it before too long. We then head back to Station Square, get the light dash ability in the sewers, and use it to open up our next level, Casinopolis. The primary gimmick here is that you need to collect and deposit a total of 400 rings to create a path to the emerald, and it seems like the main way to do this is through rewards from the pinball tables. However, if you end up completing a game of pinball and you have less than 100 rings total, you instead go to a trash area. And here we have an achievement for completing this level while having collected less than 20 rings from the pinball tables. And this achievement exists for a very good reason, because it teaches you that the meta is to just immediately lose and then collect hundreds of rings down here instead. Well, at least the ring collecting meta, because you can just skip this entire level by clipping through this wall and then spin dash jumping up to the emerald. But I happen to suffer from a serious condition that we around these parts call a skill issue. So the sewer strategy is how we completed the A mission too, considered by many casual players to be one of the tougher ones. But we are far from finished with this level, because a hidden detail here is that the game can keep track of well over 999 rings. And as you collect more and more, a giant Sonic statue will be gradually built up, being fully completed at 5,000 rings. And if that sounds like too much of a grind, I ended up hitting that as a side effect of grinding for a completely separate achievement. And if you've played this game's retro achievement set before, this is one of the big moments you've been waiting for because you want to know just how much suffering I went through to get this. The simple explanation here is that you have to survive the jank long enough to make it to the second table, collect 3 blue chip cards that spawn at random to get this idea to appear, and then launch through the center to trigger a collection event, and do that 4 times in a single 3-ball game. On my first series of attempts, I completely maxed out the timer, then on my successful attempt, I had a single hour-long plus continuous round going in order to finally get this. And that means that this single 25-point achievement took me longer than it took me to get the 100-point full VADI damageless challenge in the Minish Cap. So in order to get this achievement, the biggest hurdle you need to initially overcome is being able to consistently reach the second table. You're going to want to hit it off the left flipper at the very end so that it bounces and rolls all the way back from left to right by assisting it partway through with an up tilt. If you're on the right flipper, hit it to the center through the ramp so that it lines up with that left flipper. Again, this is by far the hardest part of this achievement, and once you get the hang of making it to the second table, the rest becomes a lot easier. Then here on the second table, you want to start farming through the cards until you get the blue chips, and the game definitely did not want to cooperate with me here. Once you finally spawn the idea, the most consistent strategy is to hit it off the flipper right about at the center to launch it through the middle. Then it'll bounce off the top of the middle bumpers, and then you're going to use the tilt to hit it into the center to trigger the collection event. So if it bounces off the top of this right bumper, you're going to want to tilt it to the left, and if it bounces off the left bumper, you're going to tilt it to the right. Rinse and repeat a few more times, and then you can finally breathe a sigh of relief now that it's finally over. Though I can't deny that it felt absolutely incredible to keep improving on until I finally overcame this one. After going through RNG hell, we get mugged the moment we leave the casino. After waking up, we head back to the Mystic Ruins where we're going to start opening up more of the level. So now let's talk about this hub. Starting in this train station area, if you go to the left, it'll take you to a new section that gives you access to Icecap and Red Mountain. And then this minecart will take you to the maze area, which is my least favorite spot in the entire game. The maze is one thing, but you have a map that you can pull up at any time. My real issue here is that I can just never get my characters to consistently run at top speed. But at least we're not worried about the maze for now, because we're heading the other way to Icecap, which is half platforming and half snowboarding. Oh boy, the snowboarding, but now's not the time to talk about that. Our unique achievement for this level is completing it with less than 20 rings, which also taught me how to breeze through the A mission speedrun. Naturally, there's a super mega ultra skip in this level too, but I didn't know about it at the time. So instead I found a way to skip a good chunk of the level by running up the slope at the beginning and spin jumping to this cave. Then in this next section, you can perform a spin jump arcing to the left to skip all the platforming, and then make your way straight to the snowboarding. As a result, everything here is pretty simple. For now at least. We then run into Knuckles who wants his emeralds back, but after we collide, Eggman swoops in to grab them, leading us to a battle with Chaos 4, which is pretty much unanimously everyone's least favorite boss fight in this game. And unfortunately you fight it in multiple stories, but at least it's not too difficult. It just has some awkward water physics and varying wait times. After the victory, we have Sky Chase Act 1, which we can complete by just chilling in the corner, taking a small break to make some more tea. After completing this section, we get shot down and Tails is now missing. Sonic runs into Amy in the casino area, and while child me always thought that Amy was an annoying character, over the years my opinion has changed, and I do like the contrast in character dynamics between her and Sonic. Since a robot is actively chasing Amy, and the Twinkle Park sign says that cute couples get in free, that's where we run off to. The unique challenge for Retro Achievements here is to complete it without destroying any badniks, but thankfully the bombs don't invalidate the achievement. This one was pretty straightforward and didn't require any crazy out-of-the-box thinking. You just gotta be careful with your spin jumps and homing attacks. The A mission required a bit of quick improv, but there are a lot of small and big skips available if you know where to look. After completing this level, we unlock a racing minigame, but we'll talk about those later. We then grab a keycard that spawned in Station Square and head to one of the best levels in the game, Speed Highway. Everything about this level from start to finish is a fun time, and none of the missions are particularly hard. Then for the Retro Achievement, we have to clear the level without jumping more than 4 times. The opening section is generous enough since I could have just stood on the edge here to save a jump. Then we wall run and perform jump 2 on the conveyors, and then jump 3 onto the helicopter. Our 4th jump is supposed to be used to hit the final switch, but you can spin jump off this ramp at just the right angle to save that final jump. So ultimately this was a fun achievement that had plenty of wiggle room. After a series of cutscenes in our endeavor to rescue Amy, we end up back at the Mystic Ruins, and then obtain the Ancient Light, which lets us open up the Red Mountain entrance near the Master Emerald. And here we have a pretty big Retro Achievements challenge, one that you definitely want to research first. Clearing the level without using more than 4 rockets, springs, ladders, or zip lines. And that first rocket gets used up pretty quickly, meaning that the spin jump will be your best friend here as we scale the mountain. Once we avoid the zip line and make it all the way up to here, you're going to want to head across before changing from auto cam to free cam in order to line up the giant spin jump to the next checkpoint down below. Then you'll line up a spin jump on this slope here to skip a spring, and instead of crossing this bridge of enemies, you're going to want to spin off the ramp below to get as much height as possible. This allows me to get up with only a single spring usage, and then after crossing this 4th yellow light next to a patch of rings, you'll blindly drop down to skip a chunk of the level and enter the final major area. There's not too much else to it once you're here, just be careful as you make it to the rocket to use up the last of your allowance, and you'll get the achievement. After learning about this skip, even the A mission was pretty easy here. Next is Sky Chase Act 2, which is almost as easy as Part 1. We also have an achievement for defeating the boss section without attacking it, and this is something I never knew was possible before, but you can just keep dodging the laser until it overheats. After emerging victorious, Tails forgets that this mode doesn't have any landing gear, so we crash onto the egg carrier. And navigating this area later on can be a bit confusing because there are 2 main configurations for the ship. and certain levels are only accessible in a specific configuration. But when in doubt, you can always travel back and forth by going into the center area first. But for now, none of that matters because our next area is the sky deck, which is right in front of us, and our achievement is to complete the level with exactly 60 rings. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, it would be if Tails wouldn't stop going rogue and collecting rings all on his own, screwing up my ring count. There are more than enough rings in the final section alone, but that means nothing when Tails is actively sabotaging me every single attempt. Alright, now you listen up here, you little shit. If you grab one more ring without my permission, I am going to chop those tails off. Got it? After I finally murdered Tails, this was a whole lot easier and I got the achievement on the very next attempt. And I also found a massive skip to make the time trial for the A mission much easier. After Skydeck, we have a mindless boss battle against Gamma, then we transform the ship and fight Chaos 6, which is as simple as freezing and attacking over and over. Our next stop is back at the Mystic Ruins, and we're off to Lost World. And oh boy, this achievement. Each 8th ring you collect earns you a jump. The jump allowance can stack, but if you get hit and lose your rings, your jumps are going to go away too. So naturally you want to collect as many as you can in the opening sections, because you'll have several areas where you may not clear a jump list every single time. What I wish I knew at the time is that you can skip the giant door by facing it, spin dashing, and then pausing to clip through, and it's ridiculously easy to pull off. But since I didn't know this at the time, I was performing my jumps, dealing with Ancient Light jank whenever I missed, and I just had such a bad time here that I needed to take a break from the set. A lot of people think that the pinball achievement is the hardest one, but I thought that this one was the hardest personally. The nice thing about clearing the snake and door section though, is that even if you die in the next area, you'll be at a checkpoint and you'll have enough rings available to clear it. Which is perfect because I died multiple times here due to the level's geometry not cooperating with me. After finally getting a good run and being able to light dash through these rings, the final section was pretty easy because you have so many skips available with the anti-gravity walls. And after clearing this achievement, naturally I had a pretty strong understanding of the level and the A mission was pretty easy. We then go through several more cutscenes, and then we make it back to the egg carrier for the final level, Final Egg. And while we have another challenging low jump count achievement, this one was a lot more fun to figure out. For clarification though, per area does not mean per checkpoint, it means per loading zone change. And unfortunately, the big thing that holds this achievement back is that your jumps won't reset in between attempts. And what I mean by that is, let's say you start at this checkpoint and you've used 0 jumps in this area. If you use 2 trying to make it through and then you die, when you respawn at the checkpoint, you don't go back to 0, and instead, you'll just respawn being down those 2 jumps, which means that more often than not, if you make it partway through and then die, that's going to be a full level reset right there. The inverse of that though, is that if you really know what you're doing and you can craft some good skips, you definitely don't need 4 per area. So at least there's a little room here and there for you to make a mistake. Once we make it to this section, it can be pretty difficult to make it through here without expending a jump, but it is possible. Not a big deal if you do need to use one though. Once we make it to this switch, you can immediately run off to the side to touch the next checkpoint and skip a huge chunk of this area. It looks bad at first, but by the end I was consistently pulling this off for the A mission too. Then we run off here while holding in, and then this area is complete. After that, it really does get exponentially easier from here on out. Everything is pretty forgiving with letting you re-attempt a jumpless section without having to sacrifice a life, and the only other thing you really need to be careful of is to not get smacked off the edge by the robots. Before too much longer, we're all done with this stage. We also have another achievement here for finding the hidden extra lives. In this room here, this platform moves down very slowly, so if you wait for about 2 minutes or so, you can slowly ride it back up and find your prize. But don't be like me and accidentally fall off in front of your live audience and then have to wait for it to come down a second time. And that brings us to the final boss of Sonic's story, Egg Viper, which is my favorite battle in the entire game. It may not be free from the jank and losing can cost you several minutes, but it does feel like the most complete and comprehensive boss in the entire game. After completing Sonic's story, a lot of people will go to Tails' adventure next. Because the two travel together for most of the game, Tails' story is going to feel like a slightly shorter version of Sonic's for the most part. Though there are a few subtle differences, such as during the cutscenes, where you can tell that the story is being told from Tails' point of view. One of the best examples of this is during the confrontation with Knuckles. It's just kind of a shame that that happens right before everyone's least favorite boss battle in the entire game. But anyways, Tails' first major event is the battle with the Egg Hornet, and then our first stage is going to be Windy Valley. The biggest difference in these levels as you're playing as Tails is that it's going to be a giant race instead. The C emblem will be your normal race, the B emblem will be winning with 50 rings, and the A emblem will be for winning against a faster version of Sonic, but it's all pretty easy because Tails is so broken with his flying ability. And you better believe we're going to be putting that flying to good use, because for retro achievements, we need to complete Windy Valley without touching the ground more than 2 times, and that first landing happens immediately. And the achievement teaches you that you really don't have to actually play through the level, and you can lazily float all the way down. And now that I know this, I never want to play the level normally again. Our next unique Retro Achievements challenge with Tails is completing Casinopolis without breaking any item boxes, but this is so easy it's really not even worth covering. The next level gets a bit interesting though. We have to complete Icecap without breaking more than 8 crystals. For the first half of the level, you can't see in front of you, so just pick a spot and hope for the best. Then for the second portion, I like to let Sonic take the lead and break a few crystals, as I trail behind him to avoid it, before taking over at the very end to win the level. It took me a few attempts, in part because I definitely saw that counter go up when I didn't touch anything, but I had a good time nonetheless. Then similar to Sonic's story, you have the same series of bosses and the sky chases, but this time you also have a bonus called Sand Hill, which is similar to the second half of Icecap, and we'll talk more about this later. And then we have a short, sweet but fun one in Skydeck, because we have to clear it in 50 seconds while touching the ground less than 5 times. And to say that less than 5 is generous is a complete understatement, because I was able to get it landing only twice, because hanging off of objects does not count as landing. So we just wing it, and then next thing you know, we get the achievement. Like I said before, the flying is just completely busted. And that's probably why flying, or rather the lack thereof, plays such a crucial role in our next major achievement. We have to complete Speed Highway without flying more than 2 times. And once I understood the actual fine print of the rules, I was able to get this in only 1. While me jumping and then initiating a flight obviously counts as 1, me falling into a booster and then flying out of that does not count. Yeah, we really are operating on some sovereign citizen levels of bullshit logic here. Saying, Your Honor, I wasn't flying, I was just in an accelerated state and then began twirling my tails which caused me to ascend vertically, really is no different than saying, I wasn't driving, I was traveling and that's totally different. What these two things do have in common though, is that the logic only ever works in fictional universes. And as a result, I was able to make it to the final area without using a single flight, and then I just casually used it to float to the end. So even in an achievement designed to try to limit Tails' broken flying ability, his flying is still just that busted. And our final boss for Tails is the Egg Walker, which is as simple as running under him, jumping over the shockwaves, attacking the legs, and then attacking the cockpit, rinse and repeat. After wrapping up Tails' story, we go from flying to gliding with Knuckles, and for the most part, his story is just looking for the shattered pieces of the Master Emerald. For the C emblems, you just have to get all 3 pieces of the Master Emerald, for the B emblems you have to do it without using any hint balls, and for the A emblems, you have what looks like it would be a pretty tight speed run, especially when you consider that the pieces are going to be randomized when you first enter the level. However, there's a pretty big oversight that makes all the A emblems easy. For Knuckles, the checkpoints occur whenever you grab a Master Emerald shard, and while the locations are randomized when you enter the level, restarting the level does not re-randomize them. So by doing a dry run where you find the location of all 3 without touching any, and then hit restart, you can then speedrun it on that second go for a quick and easy A level. So once again, we can primarily focus on the new challenges that Retro Achievements brings forth. In our first level, Speed Highway, we have to complete it without touching the ground more than 5 times. And I had some mixed first impressions on this one because it's very common to land on a sloped surface and have it count as 2 landings. But then I actually did it and realized it wasn't too bad. That limit of 5 is specifically to give you a grace period because it accounts for the geometry of the level, since nothing can really be done about that. So by using the radar and then gliding and climbing everywhere, we get this without too much of a fuss. Then for Casinopolis, we can touch the ground all we want, but we can't jump more than 4 times. But bouncing off of a spring, gliding, climbing, and bouncing off a wall are all actions that don't count as a jump. So when in doubt, just return to the ground floor, bounce off the spring, and glide around following the radar. You almost certainly won't need to use all of those jumps, it just accounts for you getting some bad RNG on the emerald shards. Afterwards, we have a quick and easy battle with Chaos 2, who you only ever fight with as Knuckles, and then for our next level, we go from without jumping more than 4 times to without jumping even once. And the main trick here is that you're going to be running off the ledge and then gliding and climbing up to get around. Bouncing off the wall once again doesn't count as a jump. This method of navigation may feel a bit clunky at times, but it's not too bad, and you may even get it at the same time as the A emblem. You know the drill after this, the battle with Sonic and Tails followed by Chaos 4. Then for Lost World, we have to complete it without flying even once. And this one's free once you realize that you don't need to be in a gliding state to cling onto the wall. You can just run and jump onto it to begin climbing instead, so make your way over to the Emerald Shard and then drop down below. Then for Skydeck, we just need to complete it without changing the rotation more than 2 times, so take all the time in the world you need to scout first. If you're really lucky, this is theoretically possible to complete without any rotations, but most likely that won't happen. So it's really just a matter of knowing which way to tilt the ship in order to open up certain doors. Also, Skydeck is the only Knuckles stage that gives you 2 minutes instead of 1 for the A emblem. And then our final boss is just Chaos 6. So next up, we'll go with the shortest of all the stories, Amy. A small bird with a necklace crashes into her, and then shortly after, one of Eggman's robots, Zero, begins chasing her. Which means that our first level with her is when we meet up with Sonic and run into Twinkle Park. And her 3 emblems are near identical to Sonic's. Reach the goal, reach it with 50 rings, and reach it under a time limit. The biggest difference though is that she's being periodically chased throughout the level, and while she may be slower than Sonic, she has her iconic hammer for attacking and can perform a pretty cool jump. But as a result, this also means that all of her A emblems are pretty easy, because it accounts for the fact that you can't do a spin dash or homing attack. It's as simple as generally knowing the route of where to go, and periodically performing your hammer jump to skip a few steps. And then for Retro Achievements, our first stage adds the challenge of completing it without collecting any rings. Or in other words, this is just one big damageless level. For dealing with a robot, I just attack aggressively to avoid being scanned, and then you just gotta be careful in the mirror segment, not get flip-flopped with your directions, and then it's pretty simple from there. After this level we get captured, but after refusing to give up the bird, Gamma has a change of heart and lets us go. Then we take the time to beat this minigame high score twice to get both of Amy's upgrades, and although the targets move pretty quickly, with a good mash and tempo, we're able to get it done. Then we're off to our next stage, Hot Shelter. And our main achievement here is both fun and fair. We have to complete the level without ever being scanned by Zero. The best defense is a good offense, so give him a good whack and then run as far ahead in the level as you can. Where this becomes a challenge is right near the very end where you have to place all the objects on their corresponding switches. So there's going to be a lot of running back to safety as you bounce off the springs and land on these support beams. After wrapping this up, we're on our third and final stage of Amy's story, Final Egg. And here we have to complete it without using the hammer even once. So that means for the first section, you're going to be doing a lot of damage boosting, and then right near the end, you're going to have to move the barrel in order to jump off it. After that, we have our final battle with Zero, and you just knock him to the edge and then hit the switch that pops up. Rinse and repeat. And then next up is the only story where I didn't encounter even a single instance of glitches or jank, Gamma. And while his levels are still pretty straightforward, there is a bit more variance to it. In addition to simply reaching the end, there will be a small objective at the end as well. And you also have a time limit, though it's pretty generous. Your B emblem will be the same task after collecting 50 rings like usual, but then the A one requires you to finish the level with more time than you started with. Which means that the main strategy here is that you want to rack up a bunch of multi-hit combos to get a time bonus. But even then it's not particularly bad. Gamma's levels are relatively short, and locking on and shooting is pretty simple. And the Retro Achievements developer cranks up the creativity a bit with the level achievements. For our first level, Final Egg, we have to complete it while only holding forward. Something I would have never even thought to try before. But the key here is that you don't have to hold forward the entire time, and you can let off the control stick, and you can also rotate the camera at will, so it's kind of like you're turning it into Resident Evil tank controls. Once you make it past the first springs, it's pretty easy from there because this level is so short. After completing the level, Eggman makes you face off against your brother Beta, and I said that most of the bosses in this game were a complete joke, and for the most part, Gamma's bosses are just a whole different level of brain dead easy. You really can just spam the shoot button over and over until you win. After proving yourself to Eggman, you get to join your brothers on the hunt for Froggy, a frog that swallowed a Chaos Emerald and spawned a tail. Our search ultimately brings us to Emerald Coast, or rather just the first section of it, because once again we have a really short level. As long as you rack up a few good combos, even the A emblem is pretty simple. Then for Retro Achievements, you have to complete the level without collecting any rings or using any springs. And in case it needs to be clarified to anyone, you don't have to complete the level objective in order to get the achievement. So don't worry about your final time being too low if you're doing this while on the A level. After capturing Froggy and bringing him back to Eggman, you go through the series of cutscenes leading to Gamma's change of heart and the freeing of Amy. After Gamma deletes his registry to Eggman, he decides that he needs to save all of his brothers. And by save, I mean murder. Don't you just hate it when you get those two things mixed up? I really do love how in the cutscene it says save, but then in the level it says destroy. But yeah, Windy Valley is pretty straightforward, you have a lot of combo opportunities, and for the achievement, you just have to clear it with exactly 30 rings in hand. No real challenge to it. But at least the next level's achievement gets a bit more interesting, because for Red Mountain, we have to complete the level with a restriction of only getting a single shot per ring collected. In this opening section, we only have 3 rings, but we need 4 shots to clear all the rubble. And despite what the achievement comments say about being able to charge up a multi-hit attack, that's definitely not true. You don't have enough shots to clear this rubble. However, you have just enough room in the upper right corner that you can jump up and squeeze through, meaning you don't need a single shot. Then from here we just stockpile as many rings as possible, and between that and hovering whenever possible, we have more shots than we know what to do with. But for this achievement, we still have to deal with the timer. Kind of. Something I noticed is that if you run out of time, you go back to the previous checkpoint with a minute remaining. So even if you barely cross the final checkpoint with 2 seconds remaining, you'll go back and start with 60. Which means that by respawning at the final checkpoint, we have just enough rings to take out the rubble, and just enough time to take out the boss. And exploiting the timer like this also helps us in our final level, Hot Shelter, where we have to complete it without destroying more than 18 badniks. Not only is that a more than generous enough allowance, but by getting a nice buzzer beater, we're able to reset with just enough time to make it to the boss and destroy it in about 10 seconds. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I meant save him in about 10 seconds. My bad. Then from here, the A level is pretty easy in comparison. After wrapping this up, we go to where most of the cast would face off against Chaos 6, and we instead have our final battle against an upgraded version of Beta. And while figuring out when to attack isn't too much of a challenge, the fact that you need some semblance of a reaction speed in order to defeat him actually makes this one of the more memorable boss fights. And with that, that should be all of the main stories, right? Froggy? Where are you? Ah, no, not this guy. Big the Cat is in search of his friend Froggy. And while putting this video together, I learned that Big the Cat is voiced by John St. John, meaning that Duke Nukem shares a voice actor with Big. I officially take back everything mean I've ever said about Big over the years. You get Froggy by fishing him up. And while Sega did go on to release some absolute banger fishing titles on the Dreamcast, at the start of the console launch, those mechanics were not refined at all. You'll cast your line, awkwardly wiggle the control stick until you get it into the position you need it, and then when you get a bite, press down and A. A lot of people don't know about that down part, and that's because the explanation is tucked away in the instruction section that most players never read. In my case, I just got extremely lucky because I treated it the exact same way I do Ocarina of Time fishing, which also just so happens to have you hold down and press A to hook. Once they're on the line, hold A to reel in, but if the tension gets too high, you can swap to B for a slower reel instead. For the bigger fish, you may need to temporarily let off the line altogether. At least from a casual perspective, catching Froggy for the C emblem and advancing the story is pretty easy, and Big's story is relatively short. For the B and A emblem, however, don't even bother trying to complete them until you get all of Big's upgrades, because it'll affect the weight of the fish you can catch. And interestingly enough, not only does Big have more upgrades than any other character, but he also has several of them that are inside the actual action stages, and not just on the overworld. While the C emblem is simply catching Froggy, the B emblem requires you to catch a 1,000 gram fish first, and then the A emblem requires you to catch a 2,000 gram fish first. Easier said than done though, because even if you understand the mechanics fairly well, that doesn't mean that they're always intuitive, and it's not uncommon to be stuck on the same fish for several minutes, just for you to have caught what appears to be the biggest fish in that moment, and it's still not heavy enough. And you would think that the first stage here, Twinkle Park, would be the easiest one because there's only a single body of water that has fish in it. But this is by far the worst one, because on top of all the previously mentioned issues, you also have the risk of it getting caught so far in this ledge that there's nothing you can do about it. So because the water here is just marginally too deep for him to stand in, you have to stand at the very edge and potentially run into this issue every single time. But the plus side of it all, if you can clear Twinkle Park's A level, you can clear the rest of them. Icecap doesn't add anything new, so our next area is going to be Emerald Coast, and this is the first of 2 levels that has a hidden area. And Retro Achievements will require you to both find the area and reel in a fish there. Conveniently enough, while getting the achievement here, I was also able to find a fish big enough to clear the A level. So surely that same logic will apply to the next level, right? For Hot Shelter, we have a series of events to go through to raise the water level as high as possible. Then once you make it to the final area, you'll need to make it to the center and stand on the glass so that a badnik throws a bomb at you, causing the glass to crack. After that, we can not only get a fish for the achievement, but catch a fish large enough for the A level. So with the other requirements met, all we have left to do is catch Froggy, so we go back to near the beginning, and then... This was the exact moment that I found out that even though Big can float on the water with the inner tube and cast his line, he can't actually capture anything. So I had to redo the entire level. And you better believe that that fish took its sweet ass time getting captured on the redo. And with all of Big's action stages done, all we have left is the final boss, Chaos 6. But for Big, you just have to catch Froggy, which can be done in a matter of seconds. So with the 6 primary stories all completed, we can now go to Super Sonic's story and... I'll be honest here, I'm not too crazy about it. You're just running around and experiencing about 10 minutes or so worth of cutscenes, and then you have your final battle. But at least the final battle isn't bad. And while we're done with the main story, we still have quite a bit left to go. We have 12 emblems scattered across the adventure fields, 4 in each of the 3 main areas. Most of these you'll probably encounter naturally, but the one that tripped me up was the one where you have to blast through the boxes, because it only works when you're in a specific configuration of the egg carrier. We also have several emblems obtained through a series of sub-games. Hedgehog Hammer is pretty self-explanatory, Sky Chase is just a matter of racking up a bunch of multi-hit combos, Twinkle Circuit is as simple as letting off the accelerator when you need to turn, and then for Sand Hill, you effectively need to get a perfect score through all the gates. Afterwards, we make our way to Mission Mode, which is exclusive to Sonic Adventure DX. And while for the most part I don't mind additional content, a lot of it is pretty bare bones. Most of it is as simple as finding a card in one location, and then performing a simple task in another, or sometimes just right in front of you. Because it's not uncommon for several mission objectives to spawn near the same area or even in the same action stage, I like to collect them all first and then go complete them. But there were a few that stood out for one reason or another. Anything involving the burger shop guy statue was pretty amusing, and it sent me down a rabbit hole of learning about some real life lore. In 1985, the Japanese professional baseball team, the Hanshin Tigers, surprised everybody by winning the Central League pennant, which ultimately led to excited fans celebrating by throwing a giant statue of Colonel Sanders into the Dotonbori Canal. And while they did go on to win the Japan Series that year, their subsequent performances were abysmal, finishing at or near the very bottom of the Central League table for nearly every season until 2002. Most of the statue was recovered in 2009, but it wasn't until 2023 that the Tigers finally won another Japan Series, meaning that after 38 years, the curse of the Colonel was broken. Anyways, back to mission mode. Regarding missions where you have to touch every single flagpole, there were 3 that stood out to me. Mission 58 because you can completely cheese it and not have to worry about the boulder chase at all. Mission 16 because the flags actually do a pretty good job of blending in with the level, so it took me a little bit longer than I would like to admit to find all 8. And Mission 54 because this one can be a bit of a challenge. The hitboxes on these flags could definitely use a little bit of improvement, because there were a number of times where I swear I touched it, but it just didn't register. And to top it all off, you're still racing Sonic, so if you try to slow things down too much, Sonic will end up completing the level and ending things before you get a chance to grab all the flags, so you still need to maintain some semblance of speed. Which means that it's now time to unveil my super secret ultra mega achievement hunting technique, pausing the game over and over. And even with this tried and true tactic, I still almost lost the race. Look at how little time there was between me grabbing the final flag and Sonic winning the race. However, this is nowhere near the hardest mission in mission mode, so it's time to go from talking about mission 54 and talk about mission 53. Pass the line of rings with 3 super high jumps on the ski slopes. Now, getting a jump off a ramp normally isn't a problem. In fact, I don't think I messed up initiating the jump animation a single time. The problem is that even when you get all 3 jumps, this final ramp just does not fucking cooperate and will rarely ever send you up to the intended height. Mission 53 was more maddening than anything else in both the vanilla game and the Retro Achievements set combined. And every time you fail, you have to go all the way back to the very beginning of the snowboarding section. The best advice I can give is to just try to wait until the very end of the ramp to initiate that animation, and once I finally got it, it didn't feel like it was because I did anything different. But thank goodness that it's finally over, so we can unwind and grab those final few emblems in the CHAO garden. Each of the 3 adventure fields has a hidden egg in it, and bringing it back to the garden will get you an achievement. So between those and the 2 default eggs in each of the 3 gardens, we have plenty to start naming after some of my viewers. It turns out that the CHAO mechanics are far more in-depth than one would initially imagine, but as far as emblems and achievements go, we just need to win all the races, which can be simplified down to give animals to CHAO to increase their stats. And for the jewel races, you're going to need to train in multiple stats, except for stamina, because as far as I know, it's completely useless in Sonic Adventure DX. And while there's an entire system where each individual CHAO has a series of grades for each of their stats, none of that matters because we're just going to power level the ever-loving shit out of our stats with a glitch. Normally when you bring an animal to a CHAO, it gets some stat boost, but then you can't pick up the animal again. But if you stand just far enough away, it will get the stat boost, but it doesn't use up the animal, so you can just pick it up and drop it over and over. And once you get that initial feel for it, it's incredibly easy to pull off consistently. And for Sonic Adventure DX, the viewer that gets to be immortalized as my Super Mega Ultra CHAO is none other than Aquator. This Retro Achievements legend was not only one of my first Twitch subscribers, but is also the very reason why we have 3D Galaxias before GTA 6. So after maxing out every single stat except for stamina, we enter our first jewel race, and we lost. Yeah, so it turns out if your CHAO needs to rest and it doesn't get a chance to do so in the garden, it's going to do so during the race instead. But I have no clue how this could have possibly happened. No, stop it. Quit going to sleep. I don't care how tired you are not going to bed until you finish eating all of your gorillas. Yeah, no clue how that could have happened. But anyways, after letting the CHAO rest, we win all the races on the first try. But then I had a brief moment of panic, because I was missing an emblem, but it didn't look like I was missing anything on my totals screen. I was genuinely beginning to wonder if I pulled a fur by triggering some kind of obscure game-breaking bug right near the very end of the set, but eventually I was able to figure it out. The one emblem I was missing was the one for completing Amy's story of all things, which is extra weird because I was looking at the VOD, and I definitely let the credits play out in its entirety, as I was joking about her theme being the best song in the game. But anyways, crisis averted, and with every single emblem collected, we can now play as Metal Sonic. Really, he's just a reskin of Sonic with some slightly different animations, and you can only play as him in trial mode, but we need to complete all of the levels for retro achievements. But at this point, I had learned so many tricks and glitches that this was all one giant casual victory lap. And after completing every trial with Metal Sonic, the victory lap continues into our final mode, Boss Rush. But again, nearly every single boss in this game is a complete joke, and with the exception of maybe Big, you should be getting all of these on your first try, because the default scores for the total top times are incredibly generous, and if you do end up having a bad run on a particular boss, you can just lose a life and redo that segment over. And while Super Sonic isn't in the boss rush, Metal Sonic is. And after that, our Sonic Adventure DX Retro Achievements journey is complete. And the best way to describe this experience is, it has some high highs and some low lows. On one hand, the Sonic Adventure DX Retro Achievement set has a fair amount in common with my favorite set on the site, Super Mario Sunshine. Both of these sets are heavily designed around the game engine, and therefore require you to learn and embrace all of the physics and the jank in order to master it, which leaves you with a stronger appreciation of the game. And again, the achievement with Sonic and Emerald Coast was one of my favorite moments of the entire journey, but some of the worst moments really are just tied to the base game itself. So if you're a huge Sonic fan, you'll probably have a good time overall. But for most people, the game itself just really isn't worth 100%ing. I enjoyed myself enough to see if my skills learned from DX will help with me finally 100%ing Sonic Adventure 2 one day, but I would never want to 100% DX again, if for no other reason than Mission 53. But at least there are no achievements tied to the Game Gear games that you unlock. But again, if this video does extremely well, I don't mind visiting the Dreamcast version in order to focus on things such as the exclusive DLC. And speaking of the Dreamcast version, while I care about the badges far more than I do the points, one thing that I noticed is that the Dreamcast version seems to have less content and less original challenges, yet it's worth more points than the GameCube version, which seemed a bit odd. But that's a different assessment for a different day. And with that, that's all I got for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and hype for more Retro Achievements content. And until next time, don't throw statues into rivers unless you want 38 years of bad luck.